Chapter 5, Step 2, The Drive-By, Mastering the Most Important Tool in Your Courthouse Toolbox. A few years ago, I saw a promising property on an auction list for the northern Sacramento area. It was in a high-end neighborhood not far from where I lived, so I drove over to see the house myself. First impressions were encouraging. The nearby homes were $500,000 and up, set back from clean streets and expensively landscaped. I knew that if we could get a great deal on a place in this area, we'd be able to flip the house easily. I pulled up to the address on the listing to find that the home itself looked as good as those on the rest of the block. Manicured lawn, perfect landscaping, and a squeaky clean exterior. At that point, the easy approach would have been to verify the address, take some pictures, and drive away. After all, this was either an occupied and well-loved home, or it was an unoccupied but extremely well-maintained home. Either way, the place was probably in excellent condition inside. But easy doesn't get you wins at auction. Instead, I hopped out of the car, strolled up the walk to knock on the door in hopes of finding someone at home. As I got closer, something stood out against the perfect exterior. The front door, which was otherwise immaculate, had two very large dents in its steel exterior. Now, I was curious. Big dents in a door generally mean someone had to break that door in, and there are only a handful of reasons for that. When I got no answer to my knock, I walked to the left side of the house and peeked in the window. At first, everything looked fine. To one side, I could tell the place was in excellent shape with nice finishes. But as I peered in the other direction, the house seemed dark. I thought perhaps the paint was a darker tone or the blinds were closed, but as my eyes adjusted, I could see the real story. There had been a fire in an entire wing of the house. Start up your best risk management tool. In Chapter 1, we looked at the key risks of buying homes at auction. Those risks are real, but we learned two critical things about them. The first is that the risks create the reward. If there were no risks to foreclosure, everyone would want them, and there'd be no profits to be found. The second critical idea is that risks can be mitigated. With some elbow grease and a good strategy, you can manage and reduce the exposure of buying at auction. That's the sweet spot. You get access to the rewards while keeping your risk as low as possible. Let's review that list of risks. 1. List accuracy. Is the information I'm seeing correct? 2. Property condition. Can I profitably get this house ready for rent or resale? 3. Occupancy. Are there occupants in the house that could negatively affect my plans for the property? 4. Clear title. Can I get the legal right to control the future of this property? 5. Valuation. Can I buy this property at an attractive price? Because the information on a foreclosed home is imperfect, each of these areas holds some unknowns for us. The best way to manage them is through information. The more you know about a property, the better. And hands down, the single best tool in your information arsenal is your car. That's right. Simply driving by a property, or having someone do it for you if you have partners or a team, is the best way to fill in those unknown blanks on your spreadsheet. A drive-by can give you critical information on 4 of the 5 key risks in buying foreclosures. We'll cover clear title in Step 4. And each bit of information decreases your risk and increases your odds of success. The house I'd found looked ideal until I hopped in my car. Only the thorough drive-by process revealed that the house had actually been on fire. That was the single most important piece of information about the home, and no amount of online research would have revealed it. It was something that had to be seen in person. Most homes, of course, haven't been on fire. Still, it's not an exaggeration to say that a good drive-by has more impact than any other single stage of the process. In this chapter, we're going to map out step by step what makes a great drive-by. Your drive-by goals. Each time you visit a property, you're trying to gather information in 4 areas. The more you can gather, the better positioned you'll be for the next steps in our process, when each bit of information helps you decide the upper limit of what you're willing to bid at auction. The 4 areas are: 1. Neighborhood. Identical houses in very different areas can be worth very different amounts. Your first job as you enter the community where the house is located is to take note of the big picture. 2. Address or listing accuracy. An important purpose of the drive-by is simply to make sure you're buying a house that exists. That may sound a little dramatic, but it isn't. Mistakes happen. The drive-by is a chance to avoid them. 3. Occupancy. As a general rule, an unoccupied house presents fewer challenges after auction. There are no eviction delays or costs, and fewer uncertainties. This isn't always the case. The person living in the house might provide the perfect new tenant, for example. But determining whether anyone is living in the property is a key part of the drive-by process. 4. Condition and value. One of the great unknowns of buying at auction is the condition and quality of the inside of a home. It's easy to get a sense of the outside condition of a home when you see it, but the inside is a mystery. Fortunately, it's one that we can use a few tricks to unravel. Let's work through each of these in turn, starting from your first approach to the home. The drive-by process. 1. Scout the neighborhood. As they say in real estate, location, location, location. Identical houses in different areas will have different values, and your first order of business in the drive-by begins before you even reach the house. As you enter the community the house is located in, take note of community or area name. Not every community has a name, but many do. You can often see this on Google Maps, and you may find signage as you enter a community. Many online sources provide great aggregate data grouped around a community: schools, walkability, safety, average home value, etc. Knowing the community can also help you identify the year a home was built in. Other listings. Are there other homes listed for sale? Those make for easy references to research online. If a home very similar to the one you're interested in is selling just down the street, you can look it up online and get not only a sense of valuation, but sometimes even a glimpse into floor plan and finish quality if the neighborhood is made up of very similar models. Watch for real estate signs. Relativity. Is the home you're interested in the largest on the block? The smallest? Is it the only single story? Often, the extremes are harder to sell. Also, the home's relative size and quality compared to others gives you a reference point for valuation. 2. Verify the address. After you visit enough homes, it's easy to become a little complacent. The navigation system on your phone says, "Your destination is the third house on the left." You pull up, you see an uncut lawn with mail stacking up on the front steps, and think, "This must be it." Not so fast. Following the easy route has got us into trouble. In fact, we've bought the wrong house more than once. I'm not kidding. One time, there were 2 foreclosure properties listed on the same street. We heard the trustee call out the property address at auction, but ended up bidding on the wrong house. Another time, we bought a house, then showed up to change the locks, only to discover that we were at the wrong place. In that instance, there was a typo on the auction list. We'd scouted and analyzed the wrong property. Double-check the address. Look for a house number. Cross-check it with your spreadsheet. Then try to ask an occupant and a neighbor. And pay attention at auction. On the auction sheet, only one word separates 123 Pine Street from 123 Pine Avenue. But in real life, there's an enormous difference between the two. 3. Determine occupancy. Even though we've bought occupied houses at auction, we prefer to buy vacant homes. There are some upsides to a house with someone in it. The person who lives there might, for example, become a tenant. Also, occupied homes tend to be better maintained. Nonetheless, in our experience, buying an empty property is simply easier and entails less overall risk. We recently bought an occupied home only to discover that the lender had wrongly foreclosed on the borrower. The house should never have been at auction in the first place. After the deal had already gone through, the occupants filed a lawsuit for wrongful foreclosure and won. That was 18 months ago. We're the owner of record on the deed, but we still face the complicated situation of getting the lender to cover our interest expenses and reimburse the owner for damages. Eventually, it'll all work out, but in the meantime, it's a complex money-losing arrangement since we've had cash invested in that house the whole time. Mind you, this isn't the norm. We've had only 2 similar instances out of thousands. Even when we have to go through the legal eviction process, it's usually not this complicated. If we know a home is occupied, we adjust the amount we're willing to bid accordingly. That adjustment is almost always enough to deal with any extra complications. Still, we like vacant properties best. You might choose differently, of course, but as with house fires, you can't determine whether a home is occupied just by looking at online listings or county documents. You need to go see it for yourself. I would estimate that we're able to correctly determine occupancy about 90% of the time during the drive-by process. We do that by looking for obvious signs. Sometimes there's cars in the driveway or kids playing in the yard. Either is a pretty clear sign of occupancy. Other times, there are bank notices on the door, the grass is a foot tall, and the front door is ajar. Those are pretty clear signs the place is empty. Knocking on the door. Even when you see signs of occupancy, it's wise to knock and try to speak with someone. If no one answers, that doesn't tell you the place is unoccupied, but if someone does, that will usually confirm that someone lives there. Talking to neighbors. The closest neighbors can give you a wealth of information. They'll almost always know whether a home is occupied. We've even had neighbors show us through vacant properties. Often, however, the signs are a little less clear. There might be a car in the driveway, but what exactly does that mean? A closer look will reveal if the tags are current, if the car is dusty and unused, or if the tires are flat. Other tricks include turning on the outdoor tap for the hose. If no water comes out, that may indicate the water is shut off to the entire home, another sign of vacancy. You'll be able to do a little more snooping at homes that are not occupied. For example, you can sneak a peek in the windows if you like. Just remember, you'll need to be able to justify what you're doing. My rule of thumb is, if someone questions what I'm doing, can I reasonably justify it? Let's say no one answers the door, the lawn is cut, and there's a large foreclosure notice on the door next to a stack of newspapers. In that case, I'd feel comfortable walking around the house and gathering more information. If, on the other hand, I'm pretty sure the place is occupied but no one seems to be home, it feels a little dodgy to start peering in the windows. 4. Property condition and valuation clues. Finally, the drive-by is a chance to pick up clues on the current value of the property and the cost to get it ready to sell or rent. You'll get a closer look at the actual outside condition of the property. Something may look great from the curb, but as with our fire-damaged home, things can be different up close. After all, only the dents on the front door gave us a clue that there was more to the story than the curb appeal would suggest. If someone's home, you'll get, at a minimum, a glimpse at the inside. You might get a sense of the quality of the flooring, for example, or a peek at the condition of the walls or the appliances. The drive-by also may give you a chance to talk to either the tenant or the owner. Both are valuable. The current tenant could be your future tenant. Speaking with the owner may even offer you an opportunity to buy the home before auction. In both cases, you'll get a glimpse inside and perhaps even a full tour. The best time for your drive-by. Even though it's the house you're interested in, that is, after all, what you're going to buy, it's the presence of people that can give you the most information about the property. For example, knocking on the door and meeting the occupant may be an opportunity to meet the owner, get a glimpse inside the house, and perhaps even find a future tenant. Seeing cars in the driveway suggests a place is occupied. Talking with neighbors can tell you whether a place is occupied and what the inside looks like. Of course, the best time to find people at home is evenings and weekends. Plan your drive-by for those times, and you'll learn far more than at any other time. Drive-by versus drop-in. We call this step a drive-by, but a better description of our approach would be a drop-in. There's a huge difference between the information you get by simply driving by and taking photos versus what you get by going the extra mile and talking to occupants and neighbors. That in-person information will let you avoid obvious risks and accurately price your bid for auction, possibly giving you an edge over your competition. Still, there's a delicate balance to the drive-by. A home that's being sold at auction is sold as is. In theory, the inside condition and occupancy are supposed to be unknown. Yet, the inside condition is one of the most important pieces of information about the property. That's why, if you want to do the job right, you need to treat this as a drop-in. You have to knock on doors. Approaching the house is a gray area. Because the foreclosure is public information, there's nothing stopping anyone from having knowledge of it. And in most neighborhoods, there's no laws against walking up and knocking on someone's door. The key is to be sensitive. An owner going through a foreclosure is going through a tough time. The last thing they need is to feel like the buzzards are circling. Remember then that if you're hiring someone to do your drive-by, they must be willing to talk to people. This isn't a job for someone who's too shy to knock on doors and talk to strangers. They also should have the people skills to be sensitive to the homeowners and tenants' situation. What do I say? Most people who struggle with the drive-by stage just aren't sure how to start. They don't know what to say when an occupant or a neighbor opens the door. Our suggestion? Just be honest. Here's what we recommend. You can change the following any way you like so that it feels right for you. Approaching the property. Hi, my name is Aaron. Do you live here? There was an online notice that this property was scheduled for foreclosure, and I wanted to confirm that that was true. Approaching the neighboring property. Hi, sorry to bother you. My name's Aaron, and I'm wondering if you know whether anyone lives next door. If you're asked why, simply tell the truth. There was an online notice that the property was scheduled for foreclosure, and I was trying to confirm that it was vacant. We only buy vacant properties. Capturing property information. Once you look at more than a handful of properties, things start to blur together. Which one had the foundation damage? Was the one on Main Street occupied, or was that the one over on Center Avenue? It takes very little time to forget the innumerable details that you can gather on a single drive-by. Here are a few important things, then, when it comes to information. Take photos. They're free, and they're worth 1,000 words. Nothing jogs the memory better than photos. Shooting them requires just a few minutes, but the results last forever. Take notes. Assume that you will remember nothing. Jot down what the neighbors tell you as well as your first impressions. List anything that seems relevant. Use Gmail to store it all. This is my favorite part. For every single address you look at, create a new email using the property address as the subject line. Write all your notes in that email and attach your photos. Send it to a Gmail address you've set up for this purpose. Voila! You now have a permanent and free file system for storing all your property information. You can find the details anytime you like simply by searching by address. Consider dedicated software. There are applications made especially for working with property data. We developed our own app, PropHawk, to capture and store photos and receipts, manage properties, and more. You can find it at prophawk.com. A reminder: drive-by information keeps on giving. You may be thinking that driving by all these properties is a lot of work, particularly when you're only going to bid on a small percentage of the homes you see. In the short run, that may be true, but the long run tells a different story. Remember that many of the properties that are slated for auction never make it there. That's why we use the fishing analogy. Auctions are a numbers game, and we need to have as many lines in the water as possible. The biggest reason that properties don't show up at auction isn't that the foreclosure process has been canceled, but that it's been delayed. The lender may have granted an extension to the owner. The homeowner may be pursuing legal action to postpone the foreclosure, or they may have settled the outstanding debt, at least for the moment. Regardless, delays are often just that, stalling tactics to put off the inevitable moment when the piper comes to call. One day in the future, that property you drove by that didn't appear on auction day is going to show up in the hands of the trustee on the courthouse steps. And when it does, you'll already have the necessary information. As you build your database of properties, remember that you may be collecting information that will come in handy for a future auction. There's no substitute for a drive-by. I recently went to an auction in El Paso and noticed that many people were using laptops and tablets to pull up information in real time as the trustees called out addresses. Looking closer, I understood what I was seeing. They were accessing Google Street View images to see photos of the property. This, I realized, was the first and only time they were seeing the property. I could understand the temptation. Street View lets you see a real photo of the house from much the same perspective as someone pulling up in a car. Why, then, not save all that drive-by time and just look online the day of the auction? Well, I knew why. As I looked over the shoulder of one bidder, I realized I'd seen the house before. In fact, I would have recognized the address and photo anywhere because we'd driven by the house every month for a year. For some of the reasons mentioned earlier, foreclosure kept getting delayed on this home over and over again. Each time it was delayed a month, we stuck to our process, doing our legwork, including another drive-by, just to be diligent. Most months, everything remained the same. Maybe the grass was a little longer or shorter or greener, but there was the house, just sitting there like houses always do. That is, like houses almost always do. As I stared at the image on the bidder's laptop, I quickly pulled up the file on our software on my phone. There it was, same address. But photos from our most recent drive-by revealed a new and critical fact. The house was gone. Sometime that month, it had been completely demolished. We knew because we'd driven by and taken more photos. The bidder in front of me, who had only dated online information and never seen the place in person, didn't. There's no substitute for a good drive-by. I'm not sure whether that bidder bought a non-existent house that day, but I'm pretty confident someone did. All I know for sure is that it wasn't us. Here's another example of the value of persistent drive-bys. We'd been collecting several months' worth of reports on a particular property. One month, a freak accident occurred that impacted the house structurally, mechanically, basically all the way around. However, by the next month, just before auction, the work had been completed, unpermitted, to make the property look better and sell for more. Find the secret. This chapter began with a look at how a thorough drive-by helped me discover that there'd been a fire in one of the homes we were considering. There are several lessons to be learned from that story. The first is that even though we call this step a drive-by, it's so much more than that. Had I simply driven past the address or parked on the street and taken a cursory look around, I would have assumed that the home was occupied and well-maintained. I would have estimated it to be in excellent condition, priced it accordingly, and gone to auction. I would have made a grave mistake. That's the obvious lesson. A good drive-by can help you avoid significant risks at auction. Remember, however, what we know about risks. They can be managed. Upon discovering that there had been a fire in the house, I could have simply been grateful for my diligent drive-by, then moved on as fast as my feet would carry me. I could have settled for avoiding a big risk. Instead, I took the time to dig a little deeper. And as it does with so many aspects of buying foreclosures at auction, the extra due diligence paid off. The closer I looked that day, the more I became convinced that the fire hadn't really been that bad. Rather than completely discard the property, I decided to adjust my bidding price to better reflect the work we'd have to do to restore the home. On auction day at the courthouse, it turned out to be no big secret that there'd been a fire at the property. The other experienced buyers had done enough homework, and the word was out. The place was one big red flag. But I'd seen it for myself and looked as closely as I could. I thought the fire wasn't horrible, figuring that with some work, we could really do something with the place. My close-up analysis gave me an extra edge. That day at auction, no one really wanted to bid. We secured the place for a price that allowed plenty of room for renovations, and in the end, the property worked out great. We had to repaint everything and use a fire restoration company to get the smoky smell out, but the deal was profitable for us, so much so that we bought a second fire-damaged property not long after. Lesson: a drive-by isn't just about avoiding risk. It's about uncovering advantage. We had a similar experience with a property that was frequently postponed at auction. The first time we drove by it, it was clearly occupied, and we knew we'd have to adjust our bid price to compensate for eviction costs. Foreclosure was postponed, but we continued to drive by the property each month. About 6 months in, we discovered it was unoccupied, but a little trashed. We changed our maximum bid accordingly, and the auction was delayed again. After a couple more months, we saw that something had changed. Now, there were cars in the driveway, and the lawn was freshly mowed. The place looked great. Occupied, we thought. Still, we took the time to talk to the neighbors again. We learned that they had cleaned up the lot and were parking their cars there, not new tenants. The house was still vacant. That little extra knowledge allowed us to pay a bit more than the other bidders at auction, who all believed the place was occupied. A good drive-by is about being thorough, yes, but it's also about being persistent. It's about being willing to knock on doors, ask questions, have conversations. A good drive-by means having the character to do more than the next guy. It's that more that will give you an edge on auction day.